I wanted to, obviously, it's going to be a whiz tour. We could spend hours talking about the indecisive or ambiguous environment in how business is tackling it. But I would like to share some key thoughts around my decision support experience on how the business world consider indecisiveness in a planning context, and also why living with indecisive environments in the business world is such a vital challenge to tackle, and how they tackle it. And I will finish, Peter, I hope I can add my 2 cents on 4 key opportunities, actually, trying to flip the coin. We are talking a lot about challenges, but there might be key opportunities to change, and business, how would business contribute to that, working with the public sector as well. And again, happy to take some questions at the end. But before I start, there is a key observation on how the business world considers the word indecisiveness or indecisive environments in a planning context. Obviously, from a military standpoint, it's quite clear, and everybody has talked about it. But for businesses, obviously, it doesn't mean a comprehensive, so never able to have a comprehensive win, meaning indecisive, not decisive. But from a business point of view, it's more from the decision-making outcome perspective. So meaning more dealing with ambiguity, ambiguous environment. So I will stay in that particular field. So in my 20 years experience, I have really seen that the words also ambiguity, how businesses tackle ambiguity, is really considered as another planning assumption. So ambiguity has to be then managed accordingly. So you are having a third category that will be embedded in decision support planning. So the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and the ambiguous case, or cases, should I say. And in a color analogy, obviously, white cases, black cases, and gray cases. So how do businesses tackle and plan for those gray cases? We're going to come back to that in a second. But first, a few words. Obviously, the business world context is a bit different from the military one, and they have by nature a more shorter, immediate outlook, I would say. So they consider the short, medium term. And I will come back. There is something to be done around for them to become better at considering the longer term and how to manage that. They have also a challenging, competitive, and complex environment. So they're really, really used to look at all the ecosystem, all their stakeholders. So obviously the obvious one, competitors, but customers, their clients, regulators, governments, media, etc. There is also, from a business perspective, the need to adapt fast. So this is a fast-moving world. So obviously to be able to thrive, but at times also to be able to survive as an organization itself, which is often has obviously high stakes there too, from that angle. And the ambiguity within business is also has a measurable cost. So the impact, obviously, of that, they are keen to avoid and get clarity on how to tackle it. So how do business go about it? So typically what I have seen, so to tackle ambiguous environments, so gray cases, so I have seen they can apply two-dimensional planning approaches for decision support, and they should do a bit more of three-dimensional approaches. So I'm not going to go into the deep dive because it would be great to take some questions, but for two-dimensional, so for example, the classic risks and impact assessments, contingency, mitigation, action planning, communication planning at all levels. So the kind of bronze, silver, and gold kind of classical resilience planning. But there is also a physical security planning, but also the virtual environment is more and more tackled as well. So for example, social media is being monitored quite actively, live actioning tools as well to be able to answer to their customers very quickly, etc., etc. So they are trying to get always one step ahead, even if obviously in social media context, this is proving impossible. But there is also the classic, and we have talked about it, scenario planning, foresight tools that are absolutely fantastic to understand especially the longer term impacts. And there is also the traditional learning and training to learn new skills, and business does that also very well around leadership, business continuity, etc. So all kinds of topics. But I have seen more and more, especially for gray cases, those two-dimensional planning approaches in business tend not to work as well because obviously the environment is quite fluid, so you need to have a multiple scenario approach. And how do you go about that? How do you understand the impacts of your decisions or your actions on the wider ecosystem? So there is a strong need here to, one, look at it more holistically and apply a real systems thinking approach here. What I mean by that is you can see, you are able to zoom in into trees, but you can also see the forest. So you are able to see the detail for a business, for example, around what are the impacts for me or from a market share perspective, how would competitors react to this particular drug launch, etc. But you are also able to zoom out and really see holistically what are those interdependencies between the different actors and stakeholders. What does that mean? Does actually my planning work in that case? And if so, what do I need to do differently? And second point that is quite powerful in that is they need to do more kind of immersive experiential event, obviously taking it from the military war games. So around business wargaming has been seen as quite a useful tool to understand the tree or the trees, but also to understand the forest and the wider ecosystem. Because it is, again, a safe environment to try and fail. And that the consequences of trying, like in the military, and there is strong links here, is really having that safe environment to be able to see what are the consequences of your decisions. How do everybody react? What are the red teams, the competitors, the regulator, what do they do? What does it mean for us? So you can try different things. And for gray cases, it's particularly relevant because you don't have just one gray case, you have a multiple of them. And having that embedded in your kind of planning resilience muscle memory is something that businesses are starting to, but not doing enough, like they often do in the public sector, or are more used to for obvious reasons. And the third point I would make here also is really around how to apply more the perfect storm scenario. And also what we have mentioned, the gray rhinos earlier by Peter, but there is also this all kinds of black. So black swans, black elephants, and I heard recently black jellyfish for COVID. So it's really around all those black and gray scenarios. How do you plan for it? How do you actually spot those blind spots? And really have this kind of longer term view and practice when they potentially also all come together at the same time. So the perfect storm scenario. One example, obviously, and I won't bash the UK being half French, half German, but there is, and I deal with it a lot currently, is around what about the consequences of Brexit with COVID and where we are at currently, and maybe additionally for a business, an internal transformation of some sort. What if all those things together, can create quite havoc in the business world? But Peter, conscious of time as well, 4 final points for me, and also 4 key opportunities, I think, on how to better tackle ambiguous environment and contribute to change. One is planning for those gray cases systematically. There is no question, and I think COVID has highlighted that very well, that there is a need in the business world to do more medium to longer term horizon scanning and more regularly, and really push the boundary on actually, is that really what we mean? What is it? If we are having all those things coming together, how can we survive effectively? But also obviously linking the 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional planning method I just mentioned and embedding those in the decision support DNA of how they go about their resilience, their testing, and that it's a continuous improvement loop is quite important, because it's all good to do one of those events, but if you don't implement it and be part of the planning process as such, it's meaningless. And also another point here around the gray cases is around looking at external challenges. Yes, they are looking at it constantly and they are very well versed with it. But what about internal as well? And often this is quite an overlooked angle, and not only the classical, maybe disgruntled employee, but there are other things that could have, however minor, it's combining all those little things together that can create those blind spots that you didn't foresee or didn't expect. The second point, and I think this is paramount, it's the public and private sectors need absolutely to collaborate more. There is, and I think COVID has been at times a fantastic example of what worked well on certain things, but it needs to become part and be a regular thing, where they need to understand each other much more and exchange best practices, because actually we are all in it together. However, there are different, aims and objectives. We are living in this particular world, and we need to work collaboratively to really tackle, especially in those ambiguous environments and ambiguous times. But also there is a need to do more collaboration of front of mind challenges. So for example, it happened to me, so there is a lot around market-wide exercises, especially in the financial sector. They're absolutely brilliant at it. And they are bringing all, the sector, public and private as well, together, and really look at, from cyber attacks to regulatory challenges on how, if there was a survival question, how would they go about it? So why not do more of those across all sectors to really see on front of mind topics, obviously COVID, but also geopolitical challenges, sustainability, innovation, you name it. That would be quite an interesting one. So collaboration, the second point. Peter, 2 more points. So one is focusing, really, really important one, is focusing on the business decision makers. Because obviously, compared to the army, the military, there is a classic way of you are trained to be a leader and you are trained to take decisions. In business, it's completely different. You are dealing with a business person that is there for different reasons. I'm not saying I haven't met good leaders, but there is also a challenge that when you are in a stressful and ambiguous environment, it requires to rehearse a particular set of leadership skills and response teams coming together. It really creates this need that they need to really train as an individual, as a leader of those individuals, but as a team of leaders as well. So having a look at from those different angles is particularly paramount. And the last point is really as well that has been pushed with COVID, but for me is a big opportunity around focusing on purpose. Businesses are more and more purpose driven. And they're really, really taking a look at how they contribute to the employees, to the customers, but to society as a whole as well. And COVID has highlighted that shift even further and accelerated that quite a lot. So the why of businesses is changing, and they have, I think, a really big role to play in tandem with the public sector to actually lift this indecisive, ambiguous environment fog. I would say the indecisive, the ambiguous environment is allergic to collaboration, is allergic to actually purpose. If there is a way to tackle this, that's where I would start. And business have a great opportunity to be a catalyst for change in that, working hand in hand, again, with the public sector. So they could not only become better at navigating indecisive / ambiguous environments with what we said above, but in tandem, bring their purpose-driven actions to contribute to build a less indecisive world.